In today's competitive environment,
All right, I think
innovating with generative AI isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Whatever your AI ambitions, Kong AI Gateway can help. Accelerate time to market, increase developer productivity, and meet security and compliance requirements. Use multiple foundation models without writing extra code, and automate repetitive tasks to keep developers focused on building. Move faster, more responsibly, with AI on your side. Visit konghq.com to learn more.
Okay, I think I can get started now. It looks like the ad is done. Hey everybody, Alex joined here by Jason, both here from Kong. We're here to talk about basically have a nice informal live streamy kind of conversation about the non-human API consumer. But before we get started, we're just gonna wait a few minutes. I know sometimes with these kinds of events, it takes a little bit for people to roll in. So just bear with us another minute or two. We'll chat about something while we're waiting for people to show up. One other thing I'll mention, I can actually see it is happening because I have LinkedIn up here on my other monitor. We're using a different kind of streaming tool, and oftentimes there's a little bit of a lag between what we're saying in streaming and what pops up on LinkedIn. So if you have questions, definitely put them in the comments, but when we answer them, there might be some weird dissonance in the timing there. So apologies in advance. But with that, Jason, thanks for joining.
You bet. Happy to be here.
Cool. Well, while we're waiting for people to join, it's definitely relevant to this topic, but it's not the topic we are going to discuss specifically. But I want to just get your general take and temperature on what's going on in the world of MCP. You know, it's been, I guess, how long has it been since it launched? Like
last year, November. It got super hot with the last month or so, but
it's actually not as new as I think a lot of people think it is, but it got super hot, I guess, for the last month and a half. But
yeah,
what are your thoughts now that it's a little less hot than it was about a month or so ago?
You know, these are always the fun things. They're new toys to play with, right? So I think the benefit of having something like MCP in whatever form or function that separates the tool from the model in this case and makes it easier to combine more tools with different models in a more repetitive fashion is great. I think there's a lot of additional work that can be done with it, and some of that we may get to show here in the conversation today.
Cool.
But I love the idea of how it's structured, especially with what Google came out with recently as well for agent to agent. Putting it together, I think is huge. Yeah. If I jumped the question, I'm sorry about that one.
No. There's no structure to these. Yeah. There's no real structure to these conversations. But I was going to ask you after MCP about the agent to agent or A2A protocol that Google just released, and I was curious. Wanted to get your take on it generally, and then to have a conversation around how it might fit in with something like MCP. Because I think I have some conversations. People are trying to figure out: are these competing forces? Are they complements? You know, are they sort of frenemies kind of thing? What are your thoughts there?
I currently view them as very complementary. I don't doubt, you know, this is a competitive world many times. Mm-hmm. So I would venture to guess at some point there may be some or additional encroachment because there is some overlap. But I think the idea, of what MCP was designed to do from the start, and what A2A was designed to do from the start, at least from what I see, they work together super well, right? So if I'm doing east-west communication across agents, A2A is perfect. If I'm doing north-south communication between a language model and the tools I want it to use, bring on MCP, right? So the better we can utilize those together, and the easier we can put those together for people, it's a win-win, I think.
Yeah. Cool. All right, we're about 5 minutes in, so I think you just mentioned a word, agent, and that's a good segue into the conversation that we want to have today. So I want to start by, I published an article, I guess about a week or so ago about this, and I've put some content out there about this idea of the non-human sort of consumer and the agent, but they're not just my ideas, right? Like I have some opinions, but I was actually inspired by a lot of stuff that was coming out of Gartner. I forget what the specific report is. I can pull it up here. Let's see. Let me open up so I make sure I cite this properly and don't get in trouble with Gartner. I can't find it. I have the stats, but I can't find the name of the report. Anyways, we'll put the actual report in the link there in the comments, I promise. So Gartner, I apologize if you're watching this. I promise I'm not I'm not trying to improperly cite your research. But what they did find is that by 2028, 50% of API usage, of course, we're going to be talking about APIs and the confluence of APIs.
Absolutely, yeah.
Here. But 50% of APIs, the usage won't involve a dev. Once again, by 2028, that's pretty soon.
Yeah, it's not far.
That's a lot, half. And then by 2029, so the following year, is that 50% of API monetization will be driven by the non-human consumer. So reading between the lines, I think that non-human consumer, it might not be the agent might not be the only non-human, but I think that's the big one that a lot of people are talking about today, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to chat with you and get your take, or just have a back and forth conversation on, I think, what this means for organizations' API strategies, right? If I still think a lot of, especially larger enterprise, are still struggling just to figure out how to make APIs work for the human consumer. Now you have this whole new subset set of consumers that are going to clearly have to be tailored for, right? In half, right, of monetization and consumption. Anyways, I'll start with that. What are your initial gut reactions to those numbers?
Well, I remember hearing that you had comments to that as well, but I'll say I given what has come out with A2A, especially recently, those may be conservative estimates, in my opinion, right?
Really?
A lot is going to have to go right, I think, for that to be a thing. But in terms of what can happen, and again, when you see how many times A2A or MCP is going to call an API, you may have a human using 1 or 2 calls on a regular basis. These may use 6, 7, or 8 calls. And so it's going to be easy enough for them to surpass what happens from a human perspective anyway, because there are just more calls that need to take place. That's how they communicate. And so
why is that? Why more calls? Like, given an API, right? Like, why would an agent have to consume that API more times per interaction than?
Remember, every LLM is based on API connectivity, right?
Yeah, sure.
So you front end an API, or you front end a language model with an API. Everything we're doing in MCP is related to API calls, and so that language model, or that agent rather, would potentially have to call 4, 5, 6 maybe different API endpoints to collect data, process data, call those endpoints again and get more data, and then that adds up fast. And so I think from a standpoint of to the point I think you're talking about with making APIs consumable for non-human users or consumers, right? Yeah. There's the speed at which those are going to get consumed is much higher, because we know what we're going to ask for, the agent may not, and so you have to give it some of that.
Yeah. Interesting. So, okay, many more API calls. So you think that by 2028, 2029, we might think there's actually more than 50%. So to me, I interpret that okay, if you're an organization that doesn't have a strategy built around this kind of consumer, you're potentially, especially if you're an organization that's trying to monetize API traffic.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
Because you have a lot of potential there. So like, what should they be thinking about? And what are the roadblocks? If we think about like all the things that are hard for just the human consumer, discoverability, documentation, properly specified APIs, all that good stuff. Like, where is there overlap, and where are there new sets of requirements for the non-human or the agent as a consumer, do you think?
I think the new sets of requirements are still going to be sussed out a little bit. We could talk about that more, but I think in terms of where there's a lot of similarity, especially from a documentation standpoint, right? If you have a well-documented API, it's easy for a human to read it, understand it, and process it and use it. It's not that far off from an agent as well, right? Because they're doing everything natural language just like we've taught them to. And so if I have a natural language snippet of a description that says, this is what this API is for, here's an example for you, I'm giving a one-shot example to a model that doesn't have to guess at anything like, hey, this is what I'm going to expect. So when I get the data back, I already know how to process it. And so the documentation of what these APIs, how they're consumed, how they're used, what the value is, that's going to become even more critical for agents to use correctly. Because if not, you're going to have a bouncing back and forth more. That's going to be time and money to get squared away. And that in turn benefits the human user again, because you're documenting your stuff, right? And I know we all hate doing that. So we could potentially use AI to solve that problem too, right? Help me document these APIs so that I can make it for everyone.
Do you think that, so yeah, for sure. I mean, if we get our APIs documented properly, it benefits the human too. But do you think that is there a different way that APIs will need to be documented for these two different consumers. And maybe it's too early to tell, but I'm just curious. Like it's not, totally the same. I mean, I see, there's this interesting thing that I keep running into. Like people saying, well, we gotta think about what's the new spec for the agent, right? And then I think, well, I mean, you have like OAS, right? And that's made to be readable. It's like, why doesn't that work? So is there actually new stuff? Like, are there new ways of specifying and new ways of documenting? And not necessarily the same thing, right? But are there new ways that the agent's going to require?
To your point, there was a concern with MCP and even A2A still, like, why aren't we using existing protocols, or what's an easier protocol or whatever, right? Why is something new coming into the fray? And I always try to say to that same line, if I don't have to recreate the wheel, why should I? And so to your point, if OAS is good enough for what we have right now, cool. Is there going to be something else that we need to help agents run more smoothly? Probably, right? I think it is still very early for us to figure that out. I know there are people way smarter than me that probably said, hey, here's this great idea of doing this one thing. And it could become the next addendum to what happens with any agent communication. Like, hey, let me put these tags on this that specify where this agent sits. Because I think the idea more concerning for me is making sure agents are somewhat bounded in what they can do, and how you can say, look, I don't care what you were able to do, where you start getting agents that don't necessarily say, I'm going to take this defined MCP server and say, here's a list of APIs. I don't want you to pull all of them at any given time, but you have access to them. You pull what you need, and then we'll go and run, whatever processes we have to. I don't know that that's necessarily as clean as it could or should be yet, because we're always calling all the tools all the time. So that may involve some new changes on some function inside of an API call. Who knows, right? I think that's still TBD.
That's interesting. Yeah, a whole new function in the call.
And if it's out there, I haven't seen it yet. I'm excited to see something.
Yeah. My just kind of spitballing. Like, my initial concern is just that we are asking people to adopt a new set of standards. We seem to not be very good at adopting standards generally already. Like, the existing sets of standards around what we need to do with our APIs. Like, I think a lot of people, there's still a lot of lag there, right? There are definitely some organizations, like I speak with plenty of them, that are doing a great job. But I mean, we still don't have, for the human consumer, APIs product. Like, we still don't have up-to-date specs. We still don't have documentation. If we're now going to ask organizations to adopt another standard to enforce, like, how realistic is this? Or at least how long out do we think it's going? How long is it going to take?
Well, right? That's one of the things that would impact. Yeah, to your point, going into getting beyond 50% by 2028.
Yeah.
Those are the things that we'd have to figure out. Right? If I can abstract that challenge away from business, there's a whole lot to be money, value, whatever that's put in. There's a whole lot of value to be placed into that. And I think getting people more accustomed to not worrying so much about these different types of protocols or different processes, whatever, processes will always change, and that's the nature of the beast. Keeping them as straightforward as possible is good. Keeping them as abstracted away from business is also worthwhile, because you want to conduct business, you don't want to conduct protocols. And so as much as you can help pull that away from people, that's where the value is going to be. But
how do you think? Or go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just say that the idea of how you connect to different systems, we don't want to have change all the time, because that impacts all of us. But that is still always the nature of the beast. That's going to happen.
Well, what do you think businesses can do, right, to trying, harden's not the right word, but maybe future-proof, right? How can they go about looking at their API strategy today? So there's actually another piece of Gartner research, I mentioned them earlier, that basically said everyone needs to be rethinking their API strategy in lieu of AI and in lieu of these non-human consumers, right? That this is API strategy relevant.
Yeah.
If you had to get in front of somebody today, maybe somebody who runs the platform team shop there, or if there's somebody who specifically owns the API program at some large organization, and they asked you, well, given all this potential change, who knows what's going to be released in 2 weeks, right? Much less what kinds of protocols or new MCP-ish or agent-to-agent-ish things that might be released here. What should they be thinking about today, right? That sort of future-proofs them for no matter what happens back then. What can they control now that'll help them sort of be prepared for whatever the future might look like?
I think, to the point we talked about at least a little bit, is knowing how you scale.
Yeah.
Because anything that becomes viral, like MCP or whatever, can impact your usage of your API endpoints, right? And so being able to know how effectively you can scale at a moment's notice, which is hard, right? Because you're still making business decisions to determine whether or not, hey, is it worth it for me to scale as quickly as someone may do it? If I get this moment, right? I don't want to miss my moment. But knowing how capable you are to scale those endpoints and to secure those endpoints, because like we mentioned earlier, if we start using agents to request data from your endpoints, it's going to come hot and heavy. And so it's I don't know if it's necessarily going to be like a turn this faucet onto full real quick for people, but it could be that way. And so making sure that your infrastructure is ready for that, and making sure that the security you have around the APIs is probably most important at all. Because if you're going to put these out there for people or for consumers generally, whether they're people or agents or other applications, or whatever
it is, right.
You know, that's still what happens today, but it just becomes a more pronounced issue because you're going to have so much more usage from these different agents.
Yeah. So if we go a layer deeper, we say things like figure out how you're going to scale, figure out how you're going to ensure security, right, for your API endpoints. And I'd probably add like consistent, right, security across the entirety of your API estate. Like I think that's very important. You know, what sort of tactical things, right, store organizations do you think? Because yes, we can all agree, we got to be scalable, we got to be secure. Like let's say that now you're speaking to somebody who, okay, I understand API infrastructure, not something like a gateway works. I've heard about this thing like an AI gateway kind of thing. I've heard about this somewhere out there in the ether. All I know, but what I know for sure is that I've got all of these various consumers. I have my set of APIs that they might want to consume. What should I be doing from like a tactical perspective, right? What are the feature function kind of things I should be thinking about looking at when it comes to something like an API or AI gateway to make sure this is doable? Or maybe it's not even in the gateways, it's somewhere else, right? What are the tactical things people should be doing to ensure this kind of scalability and security?
A lot of things. That's a hard question to answer just directly.
Yeah.
But so the point I think of is a couple of things, right? If I look at from a tactical perspective, and it depends on where this sits inside of an organization, right? So you talked a little bit about AI gateways. Having an AI gateway in place that helps you, especially, it's just something I talked to a customer about yesterday, like caching information for users. And those users are going to be agents too. Caching information so you're not necessarily pulling off of your actual endpoint is going to be big, because you could potentially get, depending on the data you're using, you could potentially get 70, 80, 90% of the responses off of your servers and just straight from cache, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But then, managing the efficiency of what you're returning back anyway is important, right? So that may be where, I know we've got, about 10 minutes or so. I don't know if it's good to show you, because I wanted to give you an example.
Yeah, please.
And this kind of ties in a little bit to where with MCP, you don't necessarily have good visibility into what's going on. And you want to have that visibility to see, how often these communications go back and forth between different systems and all that jazz. So if I may, let me see if I can find it.
I would love to see an example of this live. So please do.
We'll hope this happens this well for you. Hold on one second. All right, let me hide this. Hopefully you can see my screen here.
Yes, I can see it indeed.
All right, so this is still relatively small for these little pieces of data here, but can you see like the high level Gen AI model usage count, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I can see the AI Gateway dashboard, Gen AI model usage count. Yep, all good.
So just at a high level, right, this is Kong's Connect platform. And the idea here is being able to see information from the AI Gateway to like what you're talking about, right? And one of the points I wanted to focus on here is Connect usage. And so one of the things that we don't normally see is visibility into what Connect does on a regular basis when I'm asking questions, right? So if we ask questions, we don't know what the cost necessarily is to ask. And I'm going to show you an example here of me asking a question of Connect, or asking a question of an MCP server that's tied to Kong's backend that's answering questions, and show you kind of how much is used in the process to do this, right? So making your APIs efficient is going to be important, and making sure that the descriptions that you have in your, which again, a more tactical thing, the description that you have inside of your documentation is important to share so that MCPs are working as efficiently as possible. So this is just a high-level view over the past, 7 days or so. I'm going to go back into here and refresh this. So this is a 5-minute view of that same data plane, and I may have to refresh this here too, just to make sure this is all set. All right, I'm going to move this back to 5 minutes here. So we're back to 0. So in this chatbot right here, this is a front end that we have that one of our other SEs has created. It's a wonderful tool to look at. The idea here is that what we are doing is abstracting everything away from the end user and from the developer, right? All that has been coded in here from the development standpoint is this endpoint that comes to our gateway. And so to the point that you're talking about, what else do we need to do to kind of make this become a thing? I'm going to go back here. You see all these different options here that we create for providers and different models. So I'm just going to say hello here. Oh, I may have to refresh this too. Bear with me. I don't want to come up with a dreaded error. Hello.
If you can make it through a live demo without an error, I'll be very impressed.
I know that's a rare little thing. All right, so this is a request that I got from GPT. So here you see I've got a request that's taken place from this tool set, right? So all this data is flowing through the platform and is giving me information relative to what is being monitored inside of the platform, right? So I have sanitization stuff focusing on here. But the point that I want to show you here more importantly is the prompt token count, right? This is a really low prompt token count. And more often than not, when we ask simple questions, we're not going to get a whole lot of information. Not a whole lot of information, but what's 2 + 2? We're not going to get a whole lot of token counts inside of this process, right? So now we're at 23 tokens. Here's what I'm going to do with MCP. So in this case, MCP, as you know, is a way for us to connect backend tools or API endpoints essentially with these language models. So I'm going to ask a question now. It says, how many routes are on the control plane? Or let's do it this way. So we'll just do it on my control plane. Okay, and now we're going to sit and wait for it to process for a second. So this is actually going into our backend API calls. It's making several calls. And actually, well, I'll show this in here in a bit. But if I go back to this dashboard here and put this into the last 15 minutes, so you're going to see more requests here that are happening. I have requests that are taking place from the Kong or the MCP. This is still thinking.
And just while that's thinking, I mean, how are you actually getting all this information, right? Both in Connect and Kona. Like how is that actually being done under the hood here?
Thank you. That's a really good question. So the idea that always worries me a little bit is, and this may have timed out on me, but here's the thing we're looking at.
Oh, wow.
So this is what I want to show. So the thing that I find is interesting is when you look at MCP, it has requests that go out to different endpoints, and those endpoints aren't necessarily monitored.
Yep.
Well, what if we monitored all of those endpoints through the gateway, which is what we're doing here, right? And so in the standpoint of what a server is doing, the server is not calling out a specific API endpoint that's unsecured, that's not being monitored or managed, that's coming every time the MCP makes a call, it's coming through the gateway again. And the latency here is low enough that you can totally do that. But you see the request here that happened in the prompt token. I had put a request out that was 5 or 10 tokens.
Yeah.
This request that I put out here and this timed out, that's a function of the chatbot here and not the function of them not doing anything. This prompt response here took over 12,000 tokens. And so all of these token requests were created by MCP. And so the challenge that you want to make sure you're managing here is that when you're throwing something out here like MCP, that you're managing all the endpoints that are going back and forth through here, because these agents are going to consume a lot.
Yeah.
And you can see that here just in the amount of the tokens that are requested, right? So this request right here cost me 2 cents, and that's only one thing. But from a standpoint of what this data shows, which again, happy demo, it didn't show the response in here. I think about like 15 routes or something on my control plane. But the idea is all of this data is being processed on the back end and not being seen. So that is also something that's very tactically important for you, is if you're going to be running something like an MCP server, you have a way to view that data. Because if you can't see what's going on here, you're going to be hit with a couple of things, not least of which is a massive bill at the end of the day.
You know, so the cost thing is such a massive element here. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Security is super important, but I mean, this all costs a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
To have these systems consume.
And so the point here, you see this, right? I haven't used the model much
Yeah.
because these are counting my requests. But, but for what we're doing in here, like that's a very big concern that you want to be able to address when you're looking at something like this. Because I don't think anything like this is going to stop because we're using more tokens. Token cost is always going to go down.
Yeah.
But holy cow, right? This is 83,000% improvement or increase. That's not an improvement. That's an increase in token usage.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess from the monitoring observability point of view too, I mean, when you think about all these endpoints that these agents are going to call and consume, it's not just the LLMs, right? Like there's still your traditional APIs that are running out there. It might not be an API exposing the LLM, but just an API that's exposing some other service or data source or whatever.
Yeah.
And I guess it does kind of get to the point of, I think there's a lot of conversation around AI gateways as sort of this protective layer, right, in front of an LLM, which I think is good. Like clearly we need them. That's what you just showed, right? Like we can see token count, token usage, but these other APIs that might be behind some more, I don't love the word traditional because it makes it sound like old school. I mean, regular API gateways and regular.
We'll call it standard.
Standard. I guess it does speak a little bit to the value of being able to think about. It's all API infrastructure to some degree, but thinking about, okay, how do we ensure that we have a sort of single, central, unified place, right, where I can manage, provision, control, govern all of these various API infrastructure use cases, whether it's the infrastructure that's protecting your LLMs or the infrastructure protecting your standard APIs, right?
Yep.
Because I could see like how difficult that could be, right? If you're trying to use, here's an API gateway here, a different set of API gateways here, a different set of API gateways here for multiple standard API use cases across the org, and maybe you have your AI gateway specifically, totally separate entity, right? It seems to me like having a single consolidated approach to that is actually going to be probably pretty crucial for making sure that you're prepared for this agentic thing.
Yeah, right. Because you're to the point that you mentioned before, there are all these different standards, right, that come out on a regular basis. As much as you can take away the challenges that come from having those multiple different versions or models or applications, whatever, you're simplifying your business. And if you're simplifying your business, that normally means you're saving money too. And so why not continue that process? Put everything in a single place, regardless of whether it's standard APIs or LLM-based AI APIs, whatever. Those should all be able to traverse the same space, and you have, again, a consistent and similar look and feel throughout the entirety of your life cycle. And there's a value to that for sure.
Yeah. And I think especially when it comes to something like, if you're going to do this at scale, automation has to be part of it, right?
Absolutely.
You think about the policies you might want to enforce for something like security or authorization or token-based rate limiting or caching or whatever it might be, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think if organizations are going to start, I mean, if you might have hundreds or thousands of bits and pieces of API infrastructure out there for all of these use cases, I don't know, having a single automation framework to make sure that policies are enforced consistently across all of them, it seems like it'd be a lifesaver.
Again, to your point, if you have,
it just seems like it'd be crazy to have this vast ecosystem of, well, not necessarily crazy, but it could get very difficult depending on the scale of the use case,
Yeah. As much as you know what your process is, if that process is repeated consistently over time, that's wonderful. And so as long as you stay within that, now granted, there are always going to be exceptions to rules, whatever, right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
As long as you keep process in place, you are more efficient as a business, as a person, whatever. And so, take advantage of the chance to automate wherever you can. And then you're saving time, you're saving money, all the good stuff.
And you're reducing error, right? I think that's the other part of automation that's so critical. Like the ClickOps thing might work in some situations, but it's error prone, right? Humans, we make mistakes, manual.
We're not perfect people. Come on.
Not perfect people. So there's this governance element too. Like I think about sort of governance as code, and the automated enforcement of best practices. Well, it's harder at least to make mistakes when you just have automated checkpoints and guardrails in place.
Yeah. It's especially to the point with the speed that this will come at you. If you don't have automation in place, you will drown. Right. So make sure if we're going to add on to tactical things to do, make sure you're looking at how you are automating your processes now, because the storm hasn't come yet. You can see it on the horizon. It's coming. But knowing that there's a way to handle this stuff without getting lost in the weeds and still being able to get to this deluge of requests, it's possible. There are ways to do that here.
Yeah. Well, I know we said 30 minutes and we're running over, and I like ending on the point of the storm is coming. It's a nice little cliffhanger. Maybe we'll talk about some more tactics to prepare for that storm in our next one. But thank you all for joining. Look, that there were several people who joined us throughout the entirety of the live stream, which is great.
Thank you, guys.
You all found this helpful. This is going to keep running in your feed, from what I understand, for a while. So if you happen to join and watch the live stream, not live, if you have any questions, just put them in the LinkedIn comments, and we'll be monitoring it and getting back to you all as soon as we can. Once again, thank you all. Thank you, Jason. This was a lot of fun.
You bet.
We'll see you all soon.
All right.